Things on the conjunction that's happening today and the 23rd, and so a lot of people are focusing on end times, Revelation, rapture, and some other unusual things that are not worth mentioning. But it's interesting talking to that new chaplain that we have at work. He was at least familiar with a couple of things. And he says he's taking some courses and some classes to get his degree finished. But he was saying, one of his instructors, his professors, really hates not just the date setting, but all of the looking for signs things that is going on and popular at the moment, but has always been somewhat popular. And I told him, and one thing I told him was like, well, he kind of has a point, because everybody who's made a prediction of something happening has been 100% wrong so far. So he's got a point. But on the flip side of that, there is going to be a day when those things do come to pass. And we as the people of God, if we're paying attention, are not going to be completely oblivious. So we're probably going to be talking about it. And we're probably going to be wondering if this is the day. And so there is going to come a day when it's going to be true. And so in the meantime, as the more that we hype it up and talk about it and different things like that, it does add fuel to the fire for those that want to make fun of our walk with Christ. But it still doesn't, they want to use that to negate the truth of His coming. But the truth of His coming is still true. There is still going to be a day. So whether it's today, tomorrow, this year, next year, that's not going to change the fact that His coming is true. Yeah.
It seems to me, with all the attention in the beginning, that people should stop and think and realize, maybe I need to repent, so I'll then be ready, just in case something happens.
Well, and that seems to be one of the benefits, in the sense of it's causing people to look more closely in the time period of the fall feasts, which they weren't necessarily doing before. So that's one of the things. So this date on the 23rd, it's right in between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement and such. So they're at least in the ballpark. And so that makes a big difference for us. I'll be starting off in Deuteronomy 32, and this is that song of Moses, and this is a song, so to speak, that is supposed to serve as a witness. You go back to chapter 31, verse 21. He says, now when many evils and troubles have come on them, this song will confront them as a witness, for it will not be forgotten from the mouth of their descendants, for I know the intention they are devising this day, even before I bring them into the land that I swore. Okay, so that day Moses wrote this song and taught it to Bnei Yisrael. So this song, is it still on the lips of his people, of his children? Yeah, at least once a year, the ones that are practicing and faithful are at least going through and reading this song. So it is still on the lips of his people. And they come to this part. He's talking about the beginning of 32, giving ear and hearing his speaking, and his words, his teachings coming down like rain, like gentle showers. It's everything that a crop needs in order to grow. He is providing that water for them. And he says in verse 3, he says, for I will proclaim Adonai's name, ascribe greatness to our God, the rock. Blameless is his work. Indeed, all his ways are just. God of faithfulness without iniquity, righteousness and upright is he. Did it corrupt him? No. The blemish is his children's, a generation crooked and twisted. Is this how you pay back, Adonai, O foolish and unwise people? Isn't he your father who ransomed you? He made you and established you. So right off the bat, he is reminding them all of all the good things that he has provided for them. It says he is the rock, the Hatzur. It's something that is unchanging, something that is sure, something that is stable and won't be knocked off its foundations. So it's giving that impression, that idea that when he says he's going to do something, can you trust him to do it? What do you think? Can you trust him? Yeah. Yeah, he will do it. So what he declares will come true because he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's not like he is going to forget something that he said. It's not like it's going to slip his mind and he's like, oh man, I really should have done that. Because even though he speaks, we sometimes say a promise or we say things like, man, okay, I need to do this tomorrow. And we get to tomorrow and we get busy with other stuff and we forget. Am I the only one that's happened to? Because that happens to me a lot. Or I'm in the car and I think of something brilliant and I need to write it down and I need to get it done or taken care of, and by the time I get out of my car, it's gone. Because I can't exactly write it down or record it somehow or another while I'm driving. So, but when he speaks on something, he might speak 2,000 years ago, but he doesn't have to wait for 2,000 years and then for it to come back to mind again. It's not like he's driving down the highway and has to get out of his car and say, oh yeah, I meant to do that. Because when he speaks as something, I'm going to do this in the future, isn't he already there in the future doing it? It's not like he has to wait for time in between, because he is not limited to those things. So he calls himself this rock. The blameless is his work. And many take this rock to be the one that provided, the water for the community in the wilderness. They talk about it as if it traveled with them, wherever they were camping, and providing that living water for the community. So it was understood that this rock is God's provision. It was understood that this rock was God's presence, and it's the rock of living water. And the way it describes it, really, it's understood to be that this rock was representing the presence of the Messiah. And that's what we saw. Let's look over there in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. That's what we saw when we read that passage earlier. That's the attitude, that's the mindset that was there even in Paul's day so many years later. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, he says, verse 1, he says, "For I do not want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea." So he's talking about the Exodus. "They all were immersed into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food." And what spiritual food is he talking about there? The manna, even the provision of the quail, right? That was still a miraculous thing, but we primarily look at it as the bread of life. And he says, "And all drank the same spiritual drink." And that's kind of like the living water, the water from the rock. "For they were drinking from a spiritual rock that followed them." So it's not like Moses was having to go up to a new rock every time they camped. At least this is the understanding. To get water for how many millions of people were traveling out there in the wilderness with them? 3 million plus. There were 600,000 fighting men. So that's at least double that. So they were all drinking from from a spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was the Messiah. Okay, he's identifying the rock as Messiah. "Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, for they were struck down in the desert. These things happened as examples for us, so we wouldn't crave the evil things just as they did." So he's coming back and saying they had everything they needed. They had food and water. even as they were traveling in the wilderness. But even that didn't stop them from doing the evil things. But look at how it describes the rock, and see back in Deuteronomy 32, and see if you think it fits for the descriptions of Messiah, descriptions of Yeshua. The rock, blameless is his work. Does that sound accurate when describing Yeshua? It's the word tamim, perfect, blameless, pure, whole or undefiled in all his work. In everything he did, in everything he set out to do, it was perfect, it was blameless, it was undefiled. Could anyone accuse him of sin? Now, did they try to? When did they try to accuse the work that he did? Y'all remember? When he would heal someone on the Sabbath, weren't they trying to accuse the work that he did? Yeah. They were trying to say, you're violating the Torah, you're violating the Sabbath by healing this person. And what did he keep coming back and saying? No. I'm not violating that. It's not. You do this you circumcise on the 8th day, even if it's a Sabbath, to avoid violating the commandment. How much more am I going to be willing to heal the whole person on the Sabbath? Or if he says your ox or your donkey falls into a pit, aren't you going to lift it out? Of course. How much more valuable are these people than they? So they are trying to accuse even his work so many times. And yet, his work, everything that he did, is blameless. You cannot find accusation against him. The perfect and blameless work, he is in the bringing the righteousness of God to those who are broken and in need of redemption. Because he was the perfect Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. That's what his work was. And he died as a curse, hung on a tree. But was that work still not blameless? Was there a basis of accusation for him to be up there? No. His work was blameless. So he says, the rock, blameless is his work. Indeed, all his ways are just or righteous, tzaddik. Yeshua, he satisfied the righteous requirements of the holiness of God. He was righteous in all his ways. Everything he did was just. There was no basis for accusation. And could that be said of anybody else in history? That all his ways are just, that he is righteous or blameless in that? No. Even the great pillars of the faith, even Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Enoch, all of those guys that we look at as heroes of the faith, that can't be said of any other religious leader. Muhammad was known to be a sinner even in his own book. It calls him that. Buddha was a sinner, and he still did things that were very questionable in his behavior and such as that. But that could not be said of Yeshua. All the ways of Messiah Yeshua are just and righteous. He says, God, and he says, so the rock, blameless is his work. Indeed, all his ways are just. And then it says, God of faithfulness without iniquity. So the rock is the rock also called God. Sure seems like it. Sure reads that way. The rock and God are one and the same. And if the rock is Messiah, then what does that make Messiah? Makes him God in the flesh. See, it's one of those things that's right there. It's the rock is the God of faithfulness without iniquity. Okay? God of faithfulness. That means he's going to do what he says he's going to do. He's going to be the husband that he is supposed to be. Without iniquity, righteous and upright is he. Very straightforward. He didn't mince words with the truth. He didn't veil the truth just to not hurt feelings. Right? He was still very, very much going and single-minded toward the goal of his work. We read that in the Gospels, where it says that he set his face toward Jerusalem. Even knowing what was coming, even knowing what was waiting for him there, was he going to be deterred or taken off of the path that was set out for him? No. And that's one of the things that makes some of the things that you've read about in the last 10, 15 years so ridiculous. With the Da Vinci Code and all those different kind of things, because they talk about him getting married, they talk about him having, wanting to have children, or all these other kind of things. And all that that is doing is essentially saying, well, he can be distracted or tempted off of the path that is set before him. He is not so straightforward. His face is not set toward the work that his Father has for him. And so if you go along with those ideas, you're basically saying he is not traveling the way that in the work that Messiah has. So he says he is blameless. So he says he is righteous. He is straightforward. He calls him over in verse 15. He says, talking about once they had all of these blessings, they kind of got fat and content. They forsook God, and says he even mocked the God of the rock of his salvation. The rock of, and what's that word in salvation? The rock of Yeshua. They're mocking the rock of Yeshua. Is that still happening today? Where Yeshua, the rock, is being mocked? Yes. This is an ongoing problem. This is an ongoing issue to this day, because they don't recognize the rock for who he is. There's that moment in a movie from the 80s, not Raiders of the Lost Ark, but the one that was the third one, the Last Crusade, with Sean Connery and all that, where they're looking for the Holy Grail kind of a thing. Y'all remember this show? Well, the last part of it is he goes into a room and he's supposed to try to find the Holy Grail of Christ. And it's got all of these gorgeous, beautiful gold and jeweled cups and things all spread out across the room. And they walk in there like, how are we supposed to know which one is which? And a first guy picks, and he chooses poorly, and it ends up costing him his life. And so, but tucked away in the midst of all of these gorgeous and beautiful and ornate cups is one little clay ceramic cup kind of tucked away in the back with dust all over it. And he looks around and he looks for that one. He ends up picking that one. And so, the cup of a carpenter, the cup of the Messiah is not going to be that flashy junk that everybody thinks is gorgeous and pretty. It's going to be the one that's more simple, the less ornate. It's going to be the one that is there for the task, not for the show. And of course, that ends up being the right decision for that. But the rock, the rock of Yeshua that is being mocked, was he recognized by his own brethren? No. That's one of the things that Isaiah 53 talks about. That he was unrecognizable because there was no beauty or glory to attract us to him. He didn't have all of the trappings, all of the visuals, all of the things like, oh man, that is definitely the guy. He didn't look anything like that. So he was not recognized, and so he was mocked, even though he was the rock of salvation. He talks about in verse 18, he says, they were sacrificing to demons, to other gods, the ones they did not know. It says, the rock who birthed you, you ignored. You forgot God who brought you forth. So he was the one, Messiah was the one who was essentially making sure that they were established as a people and as a nation. Messiah was their salvation, but Messiah, or the rock, was also their father, essentially, the establishment, the one who made all of this happen. All of these things, when you read through these things, these are all descriptions of God and his character. They're all descriptions of what he is like. They're all descriptions of Messiah and what he is like. And what kind of people are we supposed to be? Are we supposed to be like him? Are we supposed to be like Christ? So all of these descriptions, we are also, as his people, supposed to be. We should emulate his character. Look over at Isaiah 51, verse 1. If I can ever turn there. It says, "Listen to me, you who pursue justice, who seek Adonai. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug." So again, the rock from which you were hewn. What is it about, if you're hewn out of a larger quarry, does that rock ever stop looking like the others that it came from? So we are hewn, if he is the rock, and we are hewn from that quarry, should we not still maintain our look of him? We are hewn from him, so we should have the same kind of character, that people should be able to look to us and see the quarry that we were taken from. And have y'all ever visited the state capitol or anything here in Tennessee? Or a state capitol in general? Okay. The one down in Austin, Texas is really pretty. It's also like the biggest state capitol that's out there. But it is made from what's called a rose or a pink granite. And it is gorgeous. I mean, it doesn't look, it's not like the White House, it's not like that. It's just a darker color to it. But you walk around the buildings in Austin, in the downtown buildings, and a lot of the buildings use rock that comes from the same quarry, or pretty close to it. So you can recognize it has a particular color, it has a particular crystal type of pattern, and the sizes of it. And then you can also tell there are some buildings that try to find and try to get it from the same source, so they can kind of match the elements of the Capitol building. But you can also tell the ones that didn't. You know, because they got something that has a rose, kind of a pinkish color to the granite, but it has a lot more graphite or something else in it, so it's got a lot more black in it than the one that the Capitol's made of. So they're almost right, but not really right. You know, they tried, but they didn't get it from the same source. And that's really kind of what this is trying to say. It's like, remember, look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you. For when I called him, he was but one, then I blessed him and multiplied him. Okay, remember where we came from. Remember who we are. Remember what our character is supposed to be. Remember what our source is, and that's what we're supposed to maintain with us everywhere we go. And so this rock that was with them in the wilderness, that provided that living water for this community of millions, you know, no matter where they were, whether they were, and no matter who they were, really. You know, it was whether they were descendants of Abraham or they were the mixed multitude. They came to the same water, didn't they? They came to the same rock to get it, to Messiah, to receive that refreshment, to receive that water, to receive the rock of their salvation. Whether they were directly from Abraham or from somewhere else, if they were there with the people, they came to the rock. The scriptures, they identify the rock as essentially sinless, the one who ransoms you, the one who is the rock of your salvation. And so then when we get into the New Testament, you get into the time where Yeshua is teaching. You know, when he says, "Upon this rock I will build my church," is there a context already for what the rock is in the mindset of the people that are listening? Yeah. They already have an understanding of who and what the rock is. church tradition and all this other kind of stuff tries to turn the rock into something else or to someone else. They try to make it about Peter, or they try to make it about some other kind of stuff. But the rock has already been identified as Yeshua. The rock is Messiah. Paul understood that's what that 1 Corinthians 10 passage is about. So upon this rock I will build my assembly, my church, the assembly of his people. And they are going to be a people that are immovable, that are sinless, that are upright, because that's what he is. Those are the characteristics that he has, and so that's the kind of people that we should be. And so then we also get to the point where we read in Matthew 7:24, therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a sensible man who built his house on the rock. Okay. What happens when you build your house on the rock? Yeah, the gates of hell do not prevail against that of the church. But also when everything comes and hits and hammers after that house, it will stand. How many of y'all have seen the footage from the hurricanes and the floods and all the water that's coming up, or the earthquakes down in Mexico and things? We've seen what all of those things can do to a house or to buildings that are not well built. But if that rock, if your foundation is Messiah, the rock, imagine knowing that no matter what is thrown at your foundation, no matter what is thrown at your house, and that's my house or the Father's house or the Father's people, nothing is going to break it off the foundation. That nothing is going to so unsettle you or tear your life apart that you still don't have your foundation. Okay, that's what he's talking about. We must, as a people of God, we must be built upon the rock. And as a family, as an individual household, you've got to build your house upon the rock. That's all that it is. Such a house, such an assembly will never be broken or shaken. And as you were saying, the gates of hell are not going to be victorious over that. That kind of a people, that kind of household. And there are other things, other rocks that people try to build their lives on. Look back in Deuteronomy 32. He's talking about all the different things that they are trying to trust in. Verse 36, he says, for Adonai will judge his people, for his servants he will relent. When he sees that strength is gone and no one is left, slave or free, he will say, where are their gods, the rock that they took refuge in? Okay. He had said earlier, verse 31, surely their rock is not like our rock, as even our enemies judge. Their rock is not like our rock. Their gods are not like our gods. Who is like you? And even our enemies know that. Even our enemies know that there is a difference. And he will say, on the day of judgment, or on the day when everything is falling apart, where are their gods, the rock that they took refuge in? Who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their libations? Let them rise up and help you, be a shelter over you. And is that ever going to happen? Are their gods, their rock, ever going to really rise up and help them and shelter them in their time of need? And the answer is no. Because they are not the rock. See now that I am he. There are no other gods besides me. He says, I bring death and I give life. I have wounded, but I will heal. And none can rescue from my hand. That's the kind of rock that we have. So those are the ones that have built on the shifting sand rather than the rock. These other gods, those are the ones that will fail them. They fall apart when the pressures of life come, and only at the rock will we receive the living water. Only at the rock, only building on the rock, will we stand through all the things that are going on. And as we read earlier in Deuteronomy 32, it's not just about the past. It's not just about even living now. It's also going to show up in our future. That's that Revelation 15 passage that we were just reading about. And they are singing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. So on the day of the Lord, whenever that happens to be, whenever that comes to pass, this song is going to be sung and reminded. This song is going to be a witness. And there are other witnesses against us, right? Heaven and earth, don't they also witness against us? The Torah, the testimony, all of that is a witness against us. But they're singing the song of the servant of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, "Great and wonderful are your deeds, Adonai Elohei Sabaoth. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who shall not fear and glorify your name, O Lord? For you alone are holy. All the nations shall come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed." All of your works are righteous. And now we're really getting to see all that you have done. We're going to get to, all these things are going to be revealed.
That's kind of interesting because in the New King James it says, "Oh, King of the Saints."
King of the saints?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have to look at that. I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, I was comment on that, so I kind of looked at it and I thought, oh, it's not that.
Interesting. And that was back in verse 3.
It goes, "Great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty, just and true are thy ways, O King of the Saints.
O King of the saints.
Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify thy name, for you alone are holy.
Interesting.
You alone are
Interesting.
holy. All nations shall come and worship you, for your judgments have been
That's Revelation 15, verse 3. Well, the one that I read said nations, and she's saying that the one she has saints. So that's interesting.
He's set apart with the Holy One. Sovereign is set apart with the
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What chapter is that?
Revelation 15. Mm-hmm.
15 what?
Verse 3.
Yes, there's in the King James, thou King of Kings.
I'd have to look at see what the...
It says, "O sovereign and King of the set apart one, the Holy One."
And what translation is yours?
The scripture, which is based on the received text.
Textus Receptus? Okay. So it's probably, Textus Receptus probably has that then as King of the Saints. And some of maybe the other Greek manuscripts will say of the nations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. But, so we know that this song of Moses is going to act as its witness. It's going to fulfill its purpose even in the coming in the day of the Lord. And that's where it comes back in Deuteronomy 32. After he had finished speaking all of these words, he says in verse 46, "Put in your hearts all the words that I call as witness against you today, that you may command your children to keep and do all the words of this Torah." Okay? The command to keep and do all the words of this Torah. For those who are the descendants of those people that are there. Okay? To keep and to do. And we as the descendants, we who have been brought in, grafting in, we have been missing out on some of this witness. Because we haven't been keeping and doing the words of the Torah. But he says in verse 47, it is not an empty thing for you. It's not a worthless thing for you. This is not an insignificant thing. Okay? This is a big deal, in other words. By saying this is not an empty thing, he's trying to hit them with the importance of it. If it's empty, then it doesn't really matter. If it's empty, then you could take it or leave it. If it's empty, well, you can do it or not do it. But he says, this is not an empty thing. He says, this is the important thing for you, because it is your life. This reality that these words are going to serve as a witness against you, that you're going to need to tell your children to keep and do the words of this Torah, because that's how you're going to live. That's how you're going to come through in your walk with the Lord. Because by this word you will prolong your days on the land which you are crossing over the Jordan to possess. And so their days in the land of promise, were those days shortened? Were they there as long as they were supposed to be? Yeah, they were never really supposed to leave it, were they? And so they were sent off into exile. Why? Because they did not, the descendants did not keep and do the words of the Torah. So talking about these characteristics, talking about these living these ways, they're supposed to be descriptions of ours. It's one of the things that we say about God, is that He is also a God who never sleeps nor slumbers, right? He is one who is never not paying attention. He's never unaware of things that are going on. He was, He is to come. He's knowing the exact moment in which He is going to act, to intercede or to move forward with His agenda. So He is, one of the characteristics is that He is awake. And we too are to be like Him. We are to be awake, even in these times. We were reading 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and 5 just the other day, and I'm just coming back to this because these are the days, these are the times that people are talking about and wondering about all of these things. He describes essentially 4 different types of people in 1 Thessalonians. He talks about in chapter 4, those who are asleep. And they're asleep because, are they alive or are they dead? In chapter 4. Yeah. So those in 1 Thessalonians, they're chapter 4, those are the ones that have already died. They're asleep. He calls them asleep. They're essentially the saints. They're essentially saved, so to speak, but they're already dead. But then he says, he's assuring them that one day, they are going to be awakened. For the Lord Himself will come down from heaven with a commanding shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the blast of God's shofar, and the dead in Messiah, those who were asleep, will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left behind, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, so we shall always be with the Lord. So there are those who are asleep. They're saved, but they're already dead. Then there are those who are asleep in chapter 5. It says, concerning the times and seasons, brothers and sisters, you have no need for anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know very well that the day of the Lord comes like a thief in the night. When they are saying, shalom and safety, sudden destruction comes upon them like a woman having birth pains in the womb, and there's no way they will escape. What kind of people are they? The ones that are saying peace and safety. Are they awake or are they asleep? They're asleep. Are they saved? No. These are the ones that are asleep because they're lost. And they're oblivious to what the Father is doing. We'll come back to it. And then there are those that he says, but you, brothers and sisters, are not in the dark, so that the day may overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of the light and sons of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So then, let us not sleep as the others do, but let us remain on the alert and sober-minded. So there are those who know the rock of their salvation, and they are awake. Okay, and they are paying attention to what He is doing. They're looking for the things that they are doing. And then there are those who seem to know the rock of their salvation, but they're still asleep. Verse 7 says, "For those who sleep, sleep at night. Those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober-minded, putting on the breastplate of righteousness and love and the hope of salvation as a helmet. For God did not destine us for wrath." And so the ones that experienced the wrath back in verse 3, or 2 and 3, those are the ones that are experiencing that. So those are the not saved. "For God did not destine us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Yeshua the Messiah. He died for us so that, whether we may be awake or asleep, we may live together with Him." Hear that? There are some who are awake that will be with Him, and there are some that seems like they're going to be asleep, and they're still going to end up with Him. There's ones that are dead. Might be talking about those who are dead, who are brought back to life, that will be with Him. But also there are some that are asleep that I think that know Christ, that are saved, but they're asleep to the things that He is doing. That makes sense? They know the rock of their salvation, but they're not really aware of the signs and the things that are going on. Yes?
There's scriptures that come to mind. To be absent from the body is to be present in the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And another one where the ruler, where Jesus went to heal his daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and they kept saying, "She's already dead," but then he said, "She's sleeping."
Yeah, she's only sleeping. Yeah. I am here to wake her up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So the point that I was trying to make with that is that there are those that are dead that are already asleep. There are those who are asleep and they're not saved. Can they still be woken up? Yes. Okay. There are those who are asleep and they are saved. Do they still need to be woken up? Yes. Yeah. They need to be woken up. What's the day of trumpets? The day of the awakening blast, where He's trying to wake up not just the lost, but also sometimes the saved. And the majority of the people of God are not aware of what He wants us to return to. And so that's one of the calls, that's one of the important things that we need to be a part of. His desire, as the rock, all His ways are just. He wants to wake His people up. So what does that mean is some of our job and is our task? Part of our task to wake people up. I don't necessarily recommend getting a shofar and blasting it in their ear, but that might help in some cases.
Also be an act of the Lord.
Yes.
We can't just do it ourselves. The Spirit has to move on
Oh, yes.
His people and get them awakened.
Yeah, He was...
It's not just something that tends to happen overnight with a lot, there's a lot of churches that are asleep, and some are dead, and they're not even,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
And when He starts that process, He also sends people.
Yeah.
He starts the process and begins opening up the eyes, and then people start asking the right kind of questions or wondering certain things, and then He begins to position His people in place to meet them and to help them along. So it's a both and.
Yeah.
His work, and then that's the work that He gives us to do. And so sometimes you hear in this life or in the Messianic Hebraic stuff, there's oftentimes so much hostility towards the church or toward where we came from. And it's like, guys, they're still your job. They're still your brothers and sisters. It's still those are the ones that need to be awakened. They are this close, and they need to know the truth. They need to know and be awakened to the things that God are doing, because we want, as much as we want to live in the blessing, we want them to experience the blessing as well. That's the kind of people that we are to be. And living as the rock of our salvation, giving out and being a part of distributing the living water, realizing that we have been hewn from that rock. And if we have been hewn from that rock, then we have the living water that should be coming from us. That make sense? Any other thoughts or things to add on that?